Hi, welcome to Lead Africa Study, the channel where we review books written about Africa, for Africa, and by African authors, with everything in between. Today we'll be looking at an anthology of short stories, Shadows on the Horizon, and it was written by Stephen Mpofu and published in 1984. The structure of this discussion is that we will look at each story individually, first through a summary, then study the themes and other pertinent issues that are raised within the story. So for now, do go and grab a notebook and a pen and let's get going. So, the first story we are going to look at is titled The Village Priest, and in it we meet two main characters, Chinoyidziwa, who is perceived as smart and who is educated and who is coming from overseas and who is having a conversation with his father Mandere. The two are sitting near a church that was built after Chinoyidziwa left for overseas, and Mandere fills him in on the developments that have occurred in the church after his departure. Chinoyidziwa learns of the two scandals that rocked the church. Firstly, the scandal of the piano that led to people playing the cowhide drum and the banjo being turned away from church, and then secondly, the scandal of the elderly woman whose offering of monkey nuts was rejected by the educated priest who said they preferred money. The story then ends with Chinoyidziwa and Mandere pondering who should serve the other, the church or the people. So from this story, several themes emerge. The first is a blend of cultural conflict and the impact of colonization on the people. We see Mrs. Jones traveling kilometers from her home to come and play the piano in the church, regardless of the fact that there are other instruments such as the cowhide drum that can be played by locals who visit the church and who live closer. In addition, the church itself does show a preference towards the piano and thus disapproves of traditional musical instruments, and this hints at the effects of colonization, where black people were taught to shun their traditions and cultures while revering the white man's culture. These conflicts further highlight the imposition of white people's culture on black people's as a result of the superiority that whites felt they have on black people. The second theme in the story is that of religion and the hypocrisy that is inherent in religious setups. There is the interplay of giving within churches, and this is driven by the presumption that giving can only be done in monetary terms. While this hints too at greed, the emerging theme is also of how colonial influences changed giving to something that can only be done with money and that cannot be done with everyday ordinary transactions, and that cannot be done too through traditional items as was done in the past through barter trades. However, despite these negative connotations of the post-colonial church, the theme of community is also revealed in the story. The church itself was built by the community when people came together to make bricks for the church building, then went on to mobilize resources for other building materials. What this highlights is the power that is seen in black people coming together to change their collective lives and build something for themselves. As such, we see that community, or the unity that is amongst peoples, is presented as the one solution that can be used to fight against the continued colonialism that is faced by people in black societies. So that's it for the village priest. You are welcome to keep the conversation going in the comments below by telling us what other themes you found interesting in the story. Now, we move on to the next story in the book, and it is titled The Black Port. The Black Port is a tale of the conflict that exists between traditional African practices and modernity. It is centered around two men, Moyo, who is presented as flamboyant and arrogant, and Maramba, who is presented as a traditionalist, and the story thus tracks these two sources of conflict. Moyo, who who has never carried black people in his car, has a breakdown, and Maramba refuses to help him, saying since his own cows are barefoot, they cannot go near the car, as he himself, Maramba, has not been allowed in the car because he does not have shoes. So when Moyo, in retaliation, shoots down Maramba's dog for eating his hen's eggs, Maramba orchestrates a revenge plan by shattering an earthen pot by the intersection of the road, swearing that his prowess will be seen through magic means. And on the day he decides to confront Moyo, he arrives at Moyo's home and finds the men already deceased from a car accident. The story finishes with Gio unable to fathom if Moyo's demise made Uncle Maramba happy or sad. So, now that we know what happens in the story, let us focus on the major themes that are highlighted. Firstly, we look at the characterization of Moyo itself, which presents some of the themes in the book. There is mental colonialism, and this is seen through Moyo, who regards himself as a superior because he has adopted white people's standards, especially regarding the ownership of property, that is his car. As such, he attains a superiority complex over other people in his community. In addition, Moyo's character, which is also his characterization, smacks of hypocrisy. This is seen when he refuses to give people lifts in his car because they are barefoot, but when he sees beautiful girls by the side of the road, even when they do not have shoes, he extends the offer of a lift to them. While this hypocritical stance smacks of double standards, it also points out a character flaw in which Moyo can be seen as exploiting women to his advantage. Again, another of Moyo's character flaws is seen through his disrespect of other people. For instance, he refers to Uncle Maramba as old man, and this is done in a way that the reader can see as derogatory. However, as Moyo becomes more and more desperate and he needs help, he refers to Uncle Maramba as a brother, thus further highlighting his hypocrisy and how he turns to call people depending on what he needs from them at the time. Then the story also has a theme of magic and realism. When Uncle Maramba is threatened by Moyo and his gun, the man is not cowed at all. Instead, he shows that he does not fear the gun because he knows the ancient magical secrets that can help him in his fight with Moyo. This point further alludes to the themes of traditional and religious beliefs in African culture and how these were used and are still being used in solving problems that can happen within societies, within communities, and within families. Another major theme that is brought out is that of storytelling, or rather the documentation of African stories. As a side note, have you ever wondered why we don't have many African stories or many stories of Zimbabwe in particular, even during the war when people could read and write, and now we depend mostly on hearsay or oral traditions, which can be grossly inadequate? And if you've ever wondered why, I think this is brought out in the story. This is brought out when Gio asks Ango Maramba why, despite the men's knowledge of African traditional practices and of magical practices, these have not been documented for future generations. While this question seems like a mockery of African traditional practices to Ango Maramba, it seems like a decent question because it touches on aspects of the lack of history amongst Africans and specifically amongst Zimbabweans. And then lastly, another minor theme in the story is that of animal abuse. Moyo shoots down Uncle Maramba's pet dog, although there was the option to restrain the dog, call the owner, and thus solve the problem that they were facing. As such, there is the unnecessary use of violence to solve problems that is seen within the story. So that's it for the story, and we move on to the next. And this story is called Midnight Operation. Set in colonial Zimbabwe, Midnight Operation explores the ravages of unemployment on the youth. The main character, Chaminuka, arrives in the city of Bulawayo from the rural areas, and he is full of hope of finding a job since he has all his educational qualifications with him. But he is soon to be disillusioned, for day after day he walks across the city, moving from one company to another, looking for a job and finding none. At first, he looks at the job seekers brigade with disdain as they do not have qualifications, but after 3 months of effortless searching, he too joins the brigade, walking with them from one place to the next in the hope of finding something. When he eventually is shortlisted by a specific company, he is excited, but the excitement dies quickly when he is turned away for not having shoes. However, Chaminuka soon meets new friends at the employment exchange, and these are Temba and July. But what puzzles Chaminuka is that despite the fact that his friends are unemployed, they actually look well to do, and they mention that they have alternative sources of income. When they invite Chaminuka to their Jones, he is at first skeptical because he realizes that they are Tsotsis, that is, they are robbers. But as unemployment continues to haunt him, he realizes he does not have many options and decides to join them at their midnight operation. They encourage him to attack one cyclist, and when he fails, they all call him a coward. This, however, emboldens him to attack another cyclist, but unbeknownst to him, the cyclist is a policeman patrolling the area and looking for the robbers. Chaminuka is then arrested. Now, several themes emerge in the story, and the first is unemployment. Mpofu uses hyperbole or exaggeration to highlight the prevalence of unemployment in the city of Bulawayo. This is seen through Chaminuka, who has not found a job in a month and who says he has met hordes of job seekers. Mpofu also notes the existence of the Job Seekers Brigade, which defines as people who meet to look for jobs together. The use of words such as hold and brigade thus highlights how unemployment has become a scourge in the city for both educated and uneducated people. Further, in relation to the unemployment situation, Chaminuka further mocks the Employment Exchange Office for providing job seekers with soup rather than with jobs, pointing to the entity's failure to carry out its mandate to society. Then, another theme that is brought out is racism and power dynamics between black and white people. The employer at the place that Chaminuka gets a job at is a white woman, and this already alludes to the power that she has, as none of the people in the job seekers brigade are white. Further, she uses the racially derogative term, the K word, to further highlight the discriminatory nature of racism. In addition, white people are shown to have power, and this is seen when the white woman threatens to call the police after Chaminuka refuses to go away after being denied the job, and it is likely that the police will listen to white power. As such, the theme of racism is used by Mpofu to highlight the power dynamics between blacks and whites in the country. Then another theme that is highlighted in the story is the theme of poverty, and this is seen when Chaminuka goes job hunting shoeless because his shoes are torn and he has nothing else to wear. This poverty, together with racism and unemployment, leads to criminal activities as people look for ways and means in which to survive. Temba and July, despite struggling to find jobs, always have money with them because they have become tortures, that is, they have become robbers. In addition, the poverty also leads to hopelessness because when people lose hope, even the things that gave them joy to begin with start to lack luster. This is seen through Chaminuka's initial excitement on coming to Bulawayo diminishes after spending 3 months of unsuccessful job seeking in the city. Lastly, the theme that Mpofu also highlights in the story is the theme of family and community in African cultures. When Chaminuka arrives in Blawayo, it is his brother who takes care of him because he opens his home to the visitor. In addition, when Chaminuka thinks of giving up, he remembers his parents who have sacrificed for his education, and this strengthens and emboldens him, knowing that he owes it to them to take care of them as payback. As such, African communities and families are thus propped up by children looking after their parents once they start working, and this highlights the importance of families sticking together and taking care of one another. And that's it for Midnight Operation, and we move on to the next story, the story of Nyamandu. In Nyamandu, we meet Kefasi, who is a sales boy in a shop owned by a black store owner, Nyamandu. The young Kefasi resents his job at the store as Nyamandu ill-treats him, and two, because it is not a real job, but he is working there undercover for the guerrillas, waiting to give them a signal once he discovers Nyamandu's connection with the white terrorists. But one afternoon, a shopper, Teke, enters the store looking for a blanket, but while he is there, two young men aged 15 and 20 enter looking for cots. They, however, do not have any money and plead with Nyamandu that he gives them some quartz for free as they are working towards liberating the country. This makes Nyamandu livid, but Teke steps up and buys the boys the quartz, forsaking the blanket he wanted to buy, saying he can sleep by a fireside to keep warm. Immediately after the boys and Teke leave the shop, Nyamandu calls the white troops to alert them of the presence of terrorists, and the whites arrive in a few minutes, with Nyamandu promising them to take them to the corroborator that evening, and the corroborator is Nyamandu. They then retreat to the back of the shop where they eat meat and drink alcohol, leaving Kefasi to guard the cars. But Kefasi goes out and signals to his two friends and other guerrillas to attack. And attack they do, quickly too, leaving Nyamantu and his friends for dead, and the shop in a state of debris. There are a number of themes that are highlighted in the story. Firstly, we see the employer-employee oppression between Nyamandu and Kefasi. Nyamandu verbally ill-treats his employee Kefasi and says statements such as, "Do you think I pay you for standing there and hugging yourself?" Statements such as these indicate a failure in communication on Nyamandu's part, as he could phrase and rephrase how he speaks to his employees so that they treat each other respectfully. In addition, a statement like this indicates his failure to create a conducive working environment for his employees. In addition, another theme that is brought out is deception, betrayal, treachery. A deception is seen through Kefasi, the South boy, who is an undercover agent for the guerrillas and therefore whose role is to ensure that whatever Nyamandu does within the business is done under his watch and is then reported back to the guerrillas. Betrayal and treachery are also seen through Nyamandu, who, despite being black and African, would rather have extra money in his pockets than protect black people who are fighting against colonialism, the same community that he belongs to. He does this through alerting the colonial powers of the existence of terrorists and a terrorist corroborator Teke, and in exchange, he is paid for it. Another theme is war, and it is depicted as brutal. This is because it does not take into consideration the fact that there could be innocent people who are drafted into it. For instance, the two youths who enter Nyamandu's shop are 15 and 20, and these are very young people. Yet at that very tender age, they are a part of a very violent war and participate in arms. As such, Mpofu highlights the brutality of war in eating its own children. And then lastly, there is the theme of community. And this is a theme that is certainly recurring and repeating itself in Mpofu's stories. In this story in particular, Community is seen when Teke forsakes buying a blanket for himself, even though it is evident that it is the cold season, and instead he buys cots for the boys who are a part of the war and who do not have money. This selflessness shows that he is a community player and is also juxtaposed along Nyamandu's selfishness, as Nyamandu seeks only to pursue things for his personal glory. And that's it again for the story. And of course, we move on to the next one, Bruised on Both Sides. And here is a brief summary of the short story. Mandere is a member of the village committee that was set up to coordinate guerrilla activities during the liberation struggle. One day, two soldiers visit his village, which has suffered abandonment as people fled from the proximity of the war, and the soldiers find his wife, who says the husband is gone for a beer party. The wife is also adamant that she is not aware of any terrorist activities in the area. After the soldiers have left, Mandere returns, but shortly after he returns, he hears gunfire outside his homestead and goes out to investigate. But outside, he meets the two soldiers who were looking for him earlier and who now question him as to the identity of the boys who fled from the gunfire scene and who they were trying to shoot at. Mandere tells them that he does not know the boys, but is then subjected to more questioning, which leaves him uneasy. But it is his wife who is worse at ease, as she listens to her husband's response as to his whereabouts, as Mandere's story does not tally with what she said earlier. Yet the soldiers ignore this and attempt to incriminate Mandere over a derailed train, of which Mandere refuses any association. Unconvinced, the soldiers demand to see Mandere's home, and there again they open ports and look around for any signs of collaboration between Mandere and the guerrillas. Finding none, they then ask him to help to remove the donkey that is stuck in the railway line. By the railway, they also enlist the help of two men who are on their way to a funeral, and together with Mandere, the donkey is removed. However, as Mandere prepares to leave, one of the soldiers interrogates him again on a likely involvement with the guerrillas, and again Mandere denies being a collaborator. Eventually, the soldier lets him go, but not before offering Mandere some of the sugar from the derailed train. But Mandere refuses, knowing that the soldiers will spread word that they are feeding him, and this can affect Mandere's standing within the village committee. 3 days later, Mandere visits the guerrillas base where all the village committee members are present. He immediately notices that this meeting is somewhat different, as people look agitated. Mandere learns the source of the agitation when one of the guerrillas turns and announces that there is a sellout amongst them. Then, holding his rifle, he instructs Mandere to stand and tells Mandere that he is the sellout who is assisting the soldiers, as Mandere assisted at the accident scene and did not report back to the guerrillas. But Mandere refutes these allegations, noting that he reported to the committee secretary, who in turn reported to the committee chairman. Upon questioning from the guerrillas, the chairman does not speak, and it is apparent he is the sellout. Now, let's get cracking with the themes. The major theme in this story is the theme of colonialism, and this manifests in the story in different ways. Firstly, because the government is being run on white people power, the black guerrillas who are fighting for the independence of their country are referred to as terrorists, and this makes it seem like they have no right to fight for the land that belongs to them and that belonged to their forefathers. Secondly, colonialism is presented as stripping away people's privacy and making them prone to invasion by colonialists. This is seen when the white soldiers fear that Mandere and his wife are harboring guerrillas, and therefore, without any search warrant, push their way into Mandere's heart and go on to open ports and plates without any invitation and even without knocking. Thirdly, colonialism is presented as brutal, and this is seen when the whites tell the Mandela family that collaborating with guerrillas who are fighting for the independence of their country is an offense that is punishable by a summary execution. The brutality is also seen through the use of landmines in the fight. This is because when the train is detonated by a landmine, there is the damage of infrastructure, that is, the damage of the railway line and the train, the damage of goods such as the sugar that is being transported, and the damage of human and animal life, seen through the passing of the donkey, thus highlighting how brutal the war to end colonialism is. Lastly, colonialism is presented as having a social impact on the colonized. This is because it leads to mistrust amongst peoples who should be on the same side. As Mandela is being questioned by the soldiers, he wonders if his wife blew his cover and sold him out to the soldiers, highlighting how external conflict can lead to conflict at home. As such, Mpofu uses the story to highlight how brutal colonialism is to the people that are affected by it. Mpofu also shows that colonialism leads to an inferiority complex amongst the colonized black peoples. This is seen through the two men who are on their way to a funeral and who pass through the wreckage of the derailed train. When they are asked where they are going, one of them responds, "We are taking a shortcut bus." The word bus is an informal term for boss and was used by blacks when referring to white people, regardless of white people's ranks, as they all perceived white people to be superior and thus deserving to be respected. Identity is also another theme in the story. One of the soldiers who interrogates Mandela is colored, meaning that in colonial and modern Zimbabwean terms, he has both black and white roots. However, he decides to fraternize with the white colonizers and ignores his black side by interrogating and instilling fear in black people. Finally, Mpofu also explores the theme of fratricidal conflict. According to a random Google search, fratricidal conflict refers to a conflict where members of the same group, society, or nation fight against each other, and this may largely be triggered by external manipulation. This conflict is seen between the guerrillas who make up the village committee. They are severely distrustful of each other as a result of colonial conflict, and they therefore fight against each other. They, for instance, suspect Mandela of assisting the white colonist government and soldiers and of ratting out their whereabouts. Further, the committee chairman is found guilty of being an informant and is condemned, and this too highlights how colonialism divides not only the colonizer and the colonized, but the colonized themselves amongst each other, as they have to choose the sides they are on and which benefit them the most. In conclusion, this story simply centers colonialism as its major theme and how colonialism therefore impacts relationships and how people see each other. Now, the next story we will examine is The Criminals, and here is a brief summary. Ness Moyo is in a hostel at the nursing hospital where she works at when two men accost her, claiming that they are policemen, and immediately start searching her room for any material that could indicate she is working against the colonial government. Using force and threatening violence, the two men have their way in the room in which they find nothing. Regardless, they place the nurse under arrest, telling her they are taking her to the charge office as she is arrested. As she takes her sweater to put it on, though, they see a newspaper where she has circled the underreporting of the cold-blooded annihilation of innocent villagers as people who were simply caught in a crossfire. This mark in the paper is seen as a spy activity and is taken in as evidence. As she walks with them to the parked car, she stalls for a while, hoping someone will see where she would have gone. At the charge office, she is jailed and 3 days later led to the interrogation room. There, she learns that she had been arrested for her role as a spy against the colonist government, and when she refuses that is the case, they show her blood stains from previous prisoners who did not agree with the crimes that they had been charged with. And with that, They show Nesmoyo letters that she sent to her sister, which they intercepted, and in which Nesmoyo warned her younger sister not to come back to the country, as she may be victimized and the country is not safe at all. The interrogators then asked the nurse to produce the proof of her words, of which she has none. They then reiterate that her actions are fruitless, as the country would never be ruled by terrorists. At first, Nesmoyo is obviously puzzled by the two men because they seem to be repeating what their superiors in government have said to them previously. But after a while, she realizes that they are actually believable and that they believe what they say. She wonders why they are on the opposite side of the revolution. They, however, leave her in the interrogation room for a while, but not before they show her a list where a name and another nurse's name and a hospital executive names are written. As they come back, she overhears them speak of her release so that the list can be wiped out completely. When Nesmoyo is released the next day, she goes to her hostel, where she quietly packs and leaves for the city of Kweru. Only then she learns that the other names on the list were wiped out. After independence, Nesmoyo sees and recognizes one of her interrogators in the ward as she does her rounds, and he has been injured by a landmine. She battles with her mind on whether to serve him as a professional or to exact revenge, but her professionalism excels. At the end, she wonders what will happen to people like him who were on the wrong side of history and whether they will attempt to fight against the hard-won independence of the country. Now, again, there are several themes that recur throughout the story, and amongst these is the theme of violence and force. Firstly, this is seen through police brutality, where two men arbitrarily enter Nesmoyo's hostel and begin to search through it without stating the reason for their search and without identifying themselves. And this speaks to not just an invasion of privacy, but also to bullying. Secondly, violence and force are used to silence disagreements. This is seen when the two policemen threaten Nesmoyo with a fist when she asks them who they are. This stops her from questioning them further, and thus they have their way with her property. Thirdly, Nesmoyo is placed under arrest, even without being told what she is being charged with. The two arresters even threaten her as they arrest her, and they say, "Girl, if you keep wasting our time like this, we are going to throw you out of the room." And this effectively works to silence her. Fourthly, the colonists use violence and force to extract information from those they think are terrorists and corroborators. Nesmoyo is forced to look at a wall where there are patches of blood from other interrogatees who refuse to comply with the interrogators, and the young woman is told she will be made an example herself. Lastly, force and violence are also used in exerting colonialism on the people. Nesmoyo learns of the wiping out of people from the interrogators list because they were thought to be informants. In addition, she also disputes the cold-blooded annihilation of people which is reported in the papers as simply being caught in the crossfire. What this highlights is that war is brutal, as ordinary people lose their lives on a daily basis. As such, for Mpofu, colonialism can only be sustained through force and violence, and ordinary individuals bear the brunt of this brutality. In contrast to the theme of violence and brutality, there is also the theme of love that is brought out. When Nesmoyo is released from the hospital, she feels indebted to her colleagues in nursing school who alerted the hospital of her whereabouts after she had been arrested, and which in turn helped to lead to her release. She feels, for the first time, an attachment to them after seeing them once she is freed. As such, the theme of love, as used in the story, highlights the importance of people banding together to ensure that they win whatever wars come come their way. You can then tie this to the theme of community that recurs throughout the stories, almost all the stories that is. And then lastly, Mpofu also examines the theme of ethical conflict and dilemmas in the story. When Nesmoyo sees the men who had her arrested before independence in the ward as she does her rounds, she is in conflict as to whether to revenge or to let go. In the end, her call of duty overshadowed her boiling fury, and she saved him as she would have any other patient. Her interaction with him highlights an ethical or moral conflict that is linked to what happens to those who corroborated with the enemy and those who are on the losing side after the war ends, and where do they go? Mpofu, however, does not give a response to this conflict. And then this brings us to the end of the story, The Criminals. We now move on to the next story, Hunters of Fortune. And again, we start by the summary. And the story, two men, Jimmy and Maviri, meet in Jimmy's opulent office in the city center at the end of a working day. Jimmy, who by appearances is wealthy, quickly ushers Maviri into the office where Maviri hands him a large packet which rouses Jimmy's interest. The two have an ongoing transaction where Maviri is to deliver the package, which he calls a big groundnut, overseas. However, Maviri is apprehensive and mentions that he has no interest in continuing with the task as there is considerable interest surrounding corrupt leaders and he fears he will be caught in it. Jimmy attempts to cajole him, reminding the other men that it was he, Jimmy, who got him a job and that there is a good commission after the delivery. But Maviri remains insistent that he has no desire to continue with the task that will certainly endanger his well-being. Jimmy then gives Maviri one last opportunity to consider, but then Maviri pulls out a card that shows that he has been an undercover detective all this time and that Maviri is under arrest. Now for the themes. This very short story, which is set in post-colonial Zimbabwe, only has one theme: corruption, and it is mainly aimed at showing the corrupt activities of individuals who went into power after independence. There are thus several instances in which corruption is showed in the story. Jimmy, for instance, sits in his opulent office and orchestrates corrupt activities such as the big groundnut deal that he wants Maviri to smuggle out of the country for him. Groundnut can thus be used as a euphemism for goods used in corrupt deals in this context. In addition, it is shown that corrupt leaders do not carry out corrupt acts themselves. Instead, they find people to skivvy for them and allows them to carry out big risks. Again, corrupt leaders also have excuses for their corrupt deals. Jimmy excuses his corrupt activities of eating Zimbabwe through the proverb of making hay while the sun still shines. Lastly, there is the interplay between corruption and integrity. This is seen when Maviri exposes that he has been working undercover as a detective and therefore has to arrest Jimmy for his corrupt deals, thus bringing a poetic flair to the ending of the story. And thus, this is the end of the story. Now, before we proceed to the next story, I would like a small favor, at least one of the following things: a like, a comment, sharing it with your friends, or at the very least, a subscription. Thank you for that. Now, let us move on to the next story, Shadows on the Horizon, and here is a short summary. The people of Mpopoti West are celebrating the end of the harvest in 1949, with families all gathered together to enjoy the bounty. But their merriment is disrupted by the arrival of three men on horseback. The villagers recognize Mr. Franchuk, who is a farmer west to their land, and Razaro, who is a worker for Mr. Franchuk. They learn the identity of the third man, Mr. Anderson, after Lazaro interprets for them that the white man recently bought their land and wants them to vacate. The people of Mpopoti West are stunned because they have not sold the land and neither have they received any payment from anyone for the purchase of their land. And two, the people of Mpopoti West are adamant that they will not leave, even if they are to be arrested. After the three riders have left, however, there is a sense of dejection amongst the villagers. While they have heard rumors and seen visions, the visit proves to them that indeed their land has been sold. One of the men, Ngubo, wishes he had known earlier that the rumor was true, so he would have moved together with his family to Mberengwa. But Ngubo's son, Fanyana, overhears his father and is disheartened. He quickly arranges for a meeting with his lover Memory, who is Africa's daughter, as he fears that the dispossession will affect their love. At their meeting place, Fanyana learns that Africa has not decided yet what to do with his family, but symbolically, Memory reminds Fanyana of the existence of a strip of virgin fertile land, which they will get once they marry, and this motivates Fanyana to try and fight for his land. On his way back from meeting with his lover, Fanyana meets some of the young men from the village who are his age mates, and he asks them what they think of the white men and what they should do. While others are staying and others are emigrating, Fanyana asks if they can all band together to fight the white men, but the other boys laugh him off. The villagers, however, realize how serious the new owner is when it comes to his desire to occupy Mpopoti West, when one morning they find women already pegging the land. Africa then organizes a group of men, including Fanyana, to chase the workers away, but the workers are insistent that they received instructions from their boss. Seeing this resistance, Fanyana and Africa and other men wait until dawn for an attack, but the following morning, more workers come, and the Fanyana Africa team realizes there is a need to re-strategize. So that evening, they meet again, this time with paraffin and matches, and once at the clearing, they set fire on Anderson's pose, and the next morning, the workers, seeing the destruction, go and never return. A week later, however, the villagers are summoned by the chief, and at the meeting, three policemen speak and let the villagers know that interferences will be severely punished, and they tell the villagers that the time to either vacate the land or stay and work for Mr. Anderson has come. After the meeting, at home, Fanyana learns that Africa is leaving together with his daughter Memory. He quickly arranges a meeting with her and learns that Africa has been threatened for involvement with the Asonic attack. The two lovers promise to write each other and visit in the future. Fanyana and family move then to Mberengwa, and this move disgruntled Fanyana, for the land is too small to feed the family and is also infertile. He also resents the place they have been sent to because he feels the intention is a genocide, as people will pass for malnutrition and lack of proper health care. So 2 years later, Fanyana disappears and is declared dead, and Memory in Gokwe disappears too. In 1981, Memory and Fanyana and their children returned to Mpopoti West a year after independence, and they are excited to see their virgin land again. Fanyana is even more sentimental as he returned to this place to fight for independence, and at the very end was the one to chase Anderson away on foot. But soon enough, they meet Maporisa, a resident from the old Mpopoti West village. Even though he is excited to see them, he tells them the land has already been sold to a man named Gambura. Fanyana remembers Gambura as a sellout during the struggle for liberation and as someone who was sympathetic to the cause for the whites. Fanyana realizes how they have traded an enemy with another enemy who also need to be fought. Several themes are explored in Shadows on the Horizon. Racism is one of these themes, and this is seen when the white characters in the story assert their superiority over the black characters. Of the three men who ride into Mpopoti West, the two riders who ride on horseback are white, and Razaro, the black worker, rides a mule, which is a hybrid of a female horse and a male donkey, and which is seen as a lowly creature. Razaro riding on a mule highlights his lowly position compared to the whites. Racism is also seen when the white people disrupt a black people's celebration, as seen by the stunned crowd after the white people have arrived. Another instance of racism is seen when one of the men, who is described as being in his mid-40s, asks Andrewson, who sold him the land, considering that they, the owners, did not sell it, and Andrewson calls him a boy, highlighting the disrespect that white people have on black people, calling older men boys. Lastly, there is also a case of internalized racism, which occurs when a black person, for instance, who has had many interactions with white people, begins to see themselves as superior compared to their black counterparts. Razaro exemplifies this because he flexes and coughs when he arrives with a white man, and this is because he feels superior to black people because of his close association with whites. He feels that he is better. Also, when Razaro translates the white people's message to his fellow people, this speaks of his shamelessness in oppressing people of his kind. As such, what we see is that racism in the story is used to depict relationships between peoples of different colors during the liberation struggle. Now, another important theme that is highlighted in the book is the theme of colonialism, and this is where white people are invading black people's territories and asserting their rights over the blacks who are the rightful owners of those territories. Colonialism is seen through the taking away of black people's lands by white people. As such, it is presented by Mpofu as a disrespectful practice that is self-serving and which speaks of greed, as it does not only strip people of their possessions, but also their traditions and customs. For instance, Andrewson is said to have bought the land of Mpopoti West, but there is no proof that he bought it from those that own the land, the rightful people of Mpopoti West. Colonialism is thus seen through the taking away of black people's possessions arbitrarily. We also see colonialism when black people are dispossessed of their land, which in turn leads to the severance of relationships. This is seen when the people of Mpopoti West have their land taken away and then leads to the breaking away of relationships. Fanyana fears that once he and his family are forced to move, he will not be able to marry his love memory, as she and their family may move elsewhere. In addition, the dispossession of people after colonialism means they are taken away from fertile lands and then shepherded into sterile lands, which in turn highlights the disdain in which colonized peoples are treated with. Another key aspect that is brought out under colonialism is how the colonists use other people to work for them and push the agenda of colonialism without them working too much. Anderson, for instance, keeps his hands clean and firstly does not speak up when he buys the land, leaving Razaro to take the heat. Secondly, he sends his black workers to peg the ground and start construction there, thus leaving the black workers at the mercy of the people of Mpopoti West. Lastly, Anderson also sends the police to intimidate people into stopping the black workers on working on land that he has supposedly bought. All these factors point therefore to the fact that the colonists themselves have others do the dirty work for them and thus only come in to claim the benefits. Colonialism in the story is also highlighted to be restrictive, as colonized peoples have to follow the rules placed on them by the colonizers. This is seen as the colonists are against all groupings of colonized black people, as these pose a threat to the colonizers because they know that once black people work together, they will be able to fight against colonialism. In addition, there is also economic oppression and segregation that occurs as a result of colonialism. Fanyana, for instance, notes that in the reserves, there is no ownership of land until marriage. He also notes that another restriction is that families can only own one piece of land, as seen by 15 people being dependent on one piece of land, which highlights the economic pressures that are then imposed on people because of colonialism. Another factor that we also need to take into account when we read the story is that colonized people then in turn develop a colonial mentality. This is seen when Fanyana asks some of his age mates what they think about the displacement, and one of them says the sale of the land represents job opportunities and he will be able to work for the new farmer. This highlights how he does not understand the value of the land he has lost, but is instead willing to work with the colonizer. Also, the sly-eyed boy laughs when Fanyana mentions that they should band together and fight, thus accusing Fanyana of being too educated and therefore having lofty ideas and ideals. This thus highlights the fact that colonialism can further inhibit how people see themselves and thus how content they become working under the colonists. This is further enabled by how the colonists themselves clothe colonialism in kindness. Mr. Anderson tells the people of Mpopoti West that he wants some of the villagers to stay on in the land so they can help him look after his livestock, and tells those that want to leave that they are free to go. The colonist thus makes it seem like he is doing the people he has colonized a favor. What is worse too is that colonialism itself is propped up by deceitful black people who are not afraid of selling out their fellows. For instance, Gambura, who buys the fertile lands of Mpopoti West after Anderson leaves, is deceitful. This is seen in characterization when during the struggle he fed white people with information, and now after the struggle he pretends he was a freedom fighter, thus highlighting his greed. Furthermore, the story does not paint up black colonized peoples as complicit, but also as resistant to colonialism. For instance, they did not give up their land easily. When they were threatened with arrest, they loudly proclaimed that they were ready to be arrested, as they cannot be chased from the land of their ancestors. As such, black people did their best to resist the forces of colonialism and did not just sit on their laurels. Now, closely related to the theme of colonialism is the theme of post-colonialism. After independence, obviously the world moves on and does not return to what it was before. Memory and Fanyana reconnect during the struggle of independence, and after independence, they revisit the fertile virgin land of their youth to see it again. 2. After Fanyana and fellow freedom fighters chase Anderson away, they believe that the land in Mpopoti West will be returned to them. Unfortunately, the land has been sold to a black man who was a sellout during the war. As such, even after the fight against colonialism, black people realize the struggle is not over, as they have to fight against the blacks who have become oppressors and bullies post-independence. Now, a minor theme touched on by Mpofu is the theme of gender. When the three horse riders arrive, the men are the ones who face them, while the women retreat to the back, highlighting how women's voices were not to be heard during colonialism. Again, male and female relations are seen when Fanyana and Memory physically struggle with each other as Fanyana makes his advances towards her. However, Memory is able to break loose and stand at a distance while Fanyana laughs. This laugh, despite his lover's discomfort, may indicate a superiority complex that men have over women. And then another minor theme in the book is religion, and Mpofu points out that Africans rely on spirit mediums for guidance. This is seen through Maphorisa, who was possessed by his uncle's spirit and helped to foretell of the arrival of the white people and the greedy black people post-colonialism. Lastly, Mpofu touches on his favorite theme, the theme of community. This community, or the coming together of colonized peoples, is seen through Fanyana and Africa, who built a force against Anderson's workmen working on their land. This helps highlight the collectivist nature of black people in the first of the colonists. However, a lack of community is seen as one of the major reasons behind the failure of black people to conquer colonialism. Fanyana and Africa's force dwindles to 7 after the first unsuccessful attempt at fighting against Anderson's invasion. Others prioritize beer drinking, and others are reluctant to do resistance work at night. This disjointed nature at fighting colonialism thus hints at how the people of Mpopoti West, in their numbers, were unable to fight against Franschhoek and Anderson. And this brings us to the end of the analysis on Shadows on the Horizon. But that is not all. We move on to the next story in the book, and that story is rainmaking. First, here is the summary. So in rainmaking, the chief and his people are at a loss after a long dry spell in their village, and therefore they decide to undertake a rainmaking ceremony. However, because their traditions have been wiped away after moving to a new region, they are unsure whether the ceremony is the correct one and if it will work. A messenger is sent to find a female virgin from amongst the population, and he comes back with the news that there is none, and this angers the chief, who blames mothers for not doing their duties effectively. Eventually, though, the ceremony is held after a few female virgins have been found, although the people are skeptical of the Shikiro who will lead the ceremony, that is Masoso. But because there is no other alternative, the ceremony is held, and men and women, through song and dance and through strict instructions from Masoso, all participate. And in the mountain, they pour libations, place offerings, and they pray. Weeks after the ceremony, people eagerly await for the rains, and when nothing comes, Masoso gives more instructions through the chief. And as these instructions are being carried out, the sky opens and it rains. A couple of themes are examined in the story. Firstly, colonialism is seen to be a harmful practice. This is because it robbed people of their traditional practices that they used to hold dear. For instance, in an alien land, the chief and his advisors, they have no idea on how to conduct a rain-making ceremony, something that their ancestors did for years and years prior. The writer thus accuses colonialism of turning human archives of traditional practice into mere grains of dust. Another theme that is explored is the theme of gender. This is seen through the dependence of the traditional rain-making ceremony on finding a virgin girl. This makes womanhood sacred, but however, it does not exact the same treatment from the boy child. In addition, it is the mothers who are blamed because their daughters are not virgins, but the fathers are exempted, which means that there is no accountability for taking care of children that is expected from men. There is also women shaming in the communities. When the Shikiro calls for one of the virgins to come through, the boy's mama that she is not a virgin, and the impact is that women are shamed by men who have likely done the same thing. Women are thus called to higher standards than men, and this is seen as a societal double standard. Mpofu also highlights customs and traditions as another theme, and this is depicted in a negative way, and perhaps as a means of highlighting the importance of parameters and guidelines to traditional practices. Once the chief gives instructions that have to be followed after the rain-making ceremony, witch hunting begins. Witch hunting, by its very nature, is very harmful and can lead to innocent people being harmed. As such, I believe Mpofu intended for customs and traditions to be carried out with parameters. So these are the three main themes in rainmaking, and these are largely brought out in the story, and this brings us to the next story, Eye Operation. In Eye Operation, Ezra, who has a glaucoma that is threatening to leave him blind in one eye, hides the secret from his lover Rita as their wedding approaches because he fears he will lose her should she know the truth. He sends his friend Tendai to Rita with the news of his eye, and from Tendai's accounts, Rita is not impressed and is threatening to leave him as he will now be a person living with blindness. Ezra's attempts to get help from Dr. Jameson are also fruitless, as the doctor mentions that the glaucoma is advanced and can only be treated with an operation. He, however, gives Ezra some medication, but back home, Ezra vows that if the medication does not work, then he will take his life because he cannot bear to lose Rita. The medication does not work. The doctor gives him a second round, but as he discusses this situation with Tendai at work, an orderly tells him of a healer in Kariba, so the two friends drive there. The healer, Mrs. Mumba, using knowledge from the herbs around her and her own skills as an operator and surgeon, cuts out the dirty blood from Ezra's eye, and for just $2, Ezra is healed. Back in Harare, Ezra goes back to his doctor, who is awed by the miracle that he sees and who proclaims that indeed the medication has worked on Ezra. Happily, Ezra goes to visit his lover. Now that we are done with the summary, let's move on to the themes. Firstly, we see the theme of deception, where Ezra fails to tell his lover who he is about to marry of something as fundamental as his health condition. In addition, he blames his deception on what he refers to as his girlfriend's totally unpredictable personality, thus failing to take accountability for his own actions and instead blaming them on someone else. Secondly, mental health and despair are also examined as a theme in the story. Ezra is in depression because of his health condition. He thus begins to think that the only solution to losing his sight and subsequently his lover is to take his life. As such, this may be an indicator of mental health challenges in the character. Lastly, the story examines African solutions. Despite Ezra being diagnosed with a glaucoma and at serious risk of losing his eye as prescribed by Western medication, he visits an African traditional healer, Mama Mumba, who is able to cure him, highlighting that at times African problems require African solutions. In addition, African solutions are also presented as inexpensive, as Mama Mumba only accepts $2 for the treatment, way more than he would have paid at the doctor's. And thus, these are the major themes in Eye Operation, which brings us to the next story, The Night Prowler. In The Night Prowler, Zindoga arrives late at his home, and when he delays getting out of his car, his wife Nyasha calls out to him to ask if he intends to stay in the carport for the night. With spite, he meets his wife by the door, and Nyasha asks him where he was at such a late hour, and because he has no response, Nyasha suggests he goes back to be with his mistresses. Gladly, Zindoga leaves, and Nyasha is anguished and thinks that perhaps her reaction was too harsh. But unbothered, Zindoga drives to his lover's home. Unbeknownst to him, there has been an electrical fault at Monica's home that has made the live fences dangerous. Still, Zindoga manages to bypass the fence and reaches Monica's door. However, Monica's father Magodo intercepts the night prowler and sets dogs on Zindoga, who flees. Magodo then returns to his daughter's room and finds a strange string, which when he pulls, leads to Monica opening her door and expecting to see her lover. Instead, Magodo stands there and questions her about this lover, whom Monica proclaims to not know. Needless to say, Zindoga's corpse is found the next morning close to the live fences, and that same day, Monica miscarries. Several themes are examined in the story. Firstly, the story highlights a marital breakdown in Nyasha and Zindoga's marriage. The marriage is characterized with emotional and verbal abuse, as Nyasha chases her husband out of the house, and an unrepentant Zindoga also does the exact thing. He goes on to gaslight Nyasha by blame shifting when he tells her he is going to sleep in the bushes, and if anything happens to him, it is Nyasha who will be responsible for him sleeping out of their marital home. This highlights that he does not see the problem he is creating in his own home. Another theme that is examined is the theme of gendered expectations, where women are expected to maintain relationships at all costs, even when they suffer mistreatment. from their spouses. According to Zindoga, Nyasha's face is permanently anguished. Nyasha too, in spite of noticing the disintegration of her marriage, stifles her sobs and pretends to be strong when she is not. She goes on to vainly hide her grieving face, and this highlights that she feels that her tears are not valid and she should not continue to put on a brave face. As such, she holds on to a marriage where she is emotionally ill-treated simply because it is an expectation placed on her. There is also self-blame on the part of Nyasha, who feels that she has scared her husband when she asked him where he had been, indicating it was a rash action on her part. She thus turns the betrayal inward and questions her own worth, absorbing blame that is not hers. Another theme that is highlighted is that of predatory behavior. While Monica's age is not mentioned, it is concerning that Zindoga, a grown man with a wife and children, has sexual relations with a girl who still lives with her father in her father's home. Lastly, retributive justice is also examined. After emotionally abusing his wife, Zindoga is electrocuted at his lover's home, highlighting the impact of the punishment he received for his act, sort of like karma. And again, we come to the end of the Night Prowler and go on to the penultimate story in the anthology, and it is titled Marriage. In this story, Lendera and Sarah are a married couple who, in their 6 months of marriage, have struggled to conceive. Lendera, the husband, has grown increasingly agitated as his friends and family are questioning his masculinity, while the family intends to find him another wife. So one afternoon, as they are fishing, he tells Sarah that he is giving her 1 more month, and if she fails to conceive, he will divorce her. Indignant, Sarah removes her ring and attempts to throw herself into the river, but luckily, Lendera saves her and they go back home. At home, Sarah suggests that he too gets tested since she was cleared by gynecologists as having no challenges affecting conception, but this angers Lendera. But then, Lendera suggests visiting a traditional doctor, and though this is against Sarah's religious beliefs, she acquiesces and goes with him. However, 2 months after, and there is still no child, and Lendera moves out of their marital bedroom. But Sarah continues to treat him well and take care of him, which only infuriates Lendera as he now wants her out of his life. So he orchestrates that they go fishing again, just so when they get there, he can push her into the river and make it seem like she took her own life. Sarah, however, is excited and she feels that by the river she will take advantage of him sexually. At the river, Lendera looks for an opportune moment to shove her into the water, and just as he gets the moment, she announces that she is pregnant. Immediately, joyfully, he changes his mind and tells her he loves her. And then there's other themes. Firstly, there is gendered blame. Again, when Sarah suggests that they both get tested to find out why they are not having children, Lendera asks her with indignancy, "Are you questioning my manliness?" This means that from his POV, it is women who bear the physical brand of infertility and men are not affected. Then coupled with the gendered blame is the second theme of societal judgment. Lendera's frustration at their inability to bear children is worsened by the fact that he is being ridiculed by society. He notes that other men question his virility while his relatives are unhappy and have suggested that he marries another wife. As such, marriages in this context are not just between two people, but take into consideration the external pressures that come from family and friends, and thus the need to fulfill these external pressures in marriage. Mental health is also examined as a theme. Sarah is emotionally strained, and this is seen when she cries and her husband says, "I don't want to see your tears. Give me a child." He thus ignores what his wife is going through and is determined to put his point across regardless of her feelings. Further, Sarah fears the judgment she is receiving from society and therefore attempts to throw herself into the river after telling Dendera she has given up because of her failure to conceive. In addition, both Sarah and Dendera are inundated by criminal thoughts after their failure to conceive. As such, the emotional strain of their marriage goes on to affect them mentally. Religion is also another theme that is examined in the story. Dendera and Sarah have differing religious beliefs. Sarah, who is a Christian, believes that her religious practices should not mix with African traditional religion. She, however, uses a derogatory term, witch doctor, to refer to African traditional healers. This is an offensive term that was used to demonize African practices in favor of Western practices during colonialism. Lastly, the theme of deceit is also examined in the story. Sarah's marriage to Dendera is held together by a baby, and despite Dendera's initial desire to throw Sarah into the river for failing to conceive, once he learns she is pregnant, he immediately backtracks and tells her he loves her. This highlights a double standard in the marriage, which indicates that the marriage is not one of love, but one that is held together by societal pressures that requires the married couples to have children together to certify it a marriage. And again, this brings us to the end of the analysis in the story Marriage. Now, we move on to the final story, Behind the Mask. In the story Behind the Mask, Ezra and the white development officer he interprets for are driving home when they see a beautiful black girl by the side of the road. The LDO is immediately interested in the girl Tsitsi and he asks Ezra to offer her a lift. Ezra, chastising the LDO for not learning the basics of the language, convinces Tsitsi to get in the car and tells the LDO that the best way to learn a language is to fall in love. When they drop Tsitsi off, however, the LDO asks Ezra to put in a good word for him, and Tsitsi is angered, asking whether that was the reason for the lift. But after she goes, the LDO continues to express his interest, and Ezra convinces him to write a letter to her. Ezra says that even if the letter is in English, she will find ways of deciphering it. On Sunday, Ezra goes to inquire from the LDO whether he managed to pen and send Tsitsi the letter. But at the LDO's home, he finds his young brother Tapiwa, who is the LDO's son's friend, looking woeful, and the young boy simply ignores his older brother. Ezra walks further in and is told by the LDO's voice who is speaking to his son John, Tapiwa's friend. The LDO tells his son never to speak the K-words language again and has his son rinse his mouth with water to wash the language of the colonized out of his mouth. Then the LDO turns and his eyes meet Ezra's. The main themes in the story include colonialism and racism. This is seen through the land development officer who has lived in the rural area under colonization for a long time but still has not learned the language of the land. He therefore has to rely on an interpreter. In addition, white colonists use offensive language to describe black people. The use of the K-word highlights the disregard and disdain that they have of the people in whose communities they have invaded and in which they live in. When the LDO has his son wash away the language in his mouth, this is a testament to that hatred and racism. Another major theme is the theme of gender. We see women being treated as unseen, as non-participants in their own stories. The LDO speaks of Tsitsi as though she is not there and as though she is a commodity. In addition, women are sexualized. The LDO licks his lips as Tsitsi walks away from his car, and this highlights how, to him, she represents nothing more than a tool to meet his sexual desires. Lastly, the final lastly of this anthology, there are double standards in the story. The LDO expresses his desire to court the black woman, yet he treats her language with disdain. Instead, All he wants to achieve is to plunder and control without a thought as to who will be hurt. Only his selfish desires and only the selfish desires of colonists matter to them, and everyone else is second class to their needs. And this then brings us to the end of the collection of short stories, Shadows on the Horizon by Stephen Mpofu. I do hope that each story we examined here helped you in better understanding the stories and their underlying themes. I also hope that you enjoyed reading the book as much as I did, and you will share this video with your friends. With that said, please let me know what books you are studying in the comments below, and I will try to source them and analyze them for you. And lastly, the drill. At least one of those: a like, a subscription, a share, a comment, or all four of the above will be much appreciated. See you in the next one, and all the best in your classes. Goodbye.